The quiet birthday, the morning sun filtered through soft, white curtains, touching the edges of a quiet home that held more silence than sound. Sandra Bullock sat near the window with a mug of coffee she had not yet touched. Outside, the city moved as usual. Cars hummed, birds sang, people laughed, but inside her heart time seemed slower, heavier. It was her birthday, yet she felt no reason to celebrate. Her children had gone to school. Her phone buzzed with messages from fans and friends. But something inside her whispered that something was missing. She looked at an old photograph resting on the shelf. It was from the set of a movie she filmed years ago. In the picture, she was laughing, her hand resting lightly on Keanu Reeves's shoulder. The warmth in his eyes was calm and sincere, the kind that didn't need words. She remembered that day clearly. It was raining. They were soaked from filming a long, emotional scene, and he had brought her a towel and a cup of tea without saying anything. That small gesture had stayed in her memory like a quiet melody that never fades. As she stared at that picture now, a deep sense of longing filled her chest. Not for romance or fame, but for something simpler. For kindness, for peace, for the feeling of being understood without having to speak. She smiled faintly and whispered, "You always knew how to make a moment feel human." Across the city, in a small workshop filled with old motorcycles and the smell of oil and dust, Keanu Reeves wiped his hands with a rag and looked at his phone. A quiet reminder blinked on the screen, Sandra's birthday. He stopped for a second, leaning against the wall, lost in thought. He hadn't spoken to her in months. Life had carried them in different directions. He had been busy with a film shoot that took him across continents, while she had been focused on her family and her quiet life away from Hollywood noise. Yet the memory of her laughter still echoed somewhere inside him. It wasn't the laughter from interviews or red carpets. It was the kind that came from her soul, the kind that could make an ordinary moment feel extraordinary. He thought about sending her a simple message, maybe a happy birthday text, but something inside him said it wasn't enough. She had done so much for others, carried so many people through their pain, that a text would feel too small, too empty. He put down his phone and looked around the room. In the corner sat an old wooden box, something he had kept for years. Inside it were letters, small mementos, and a few gifts he had collected over time, things he never gave away. Among them was a folded note written years ago during the filming of their first movie together. He had written it one night but never found the courage to give it to her. He opened it now, reading his own words written in a younger hand. "You remind me that kindness still exists in this world. Thank you for that." He smiled, feeling the weight of the years between them. Maybe, he thought, today was the day to finally send her something meaningful, not as an actor, not as a friend from the past, but as someone who had quietly admired her strength for decades. Meanwhile, Sandra walked into her garden, the air warm and gentle. She looked at the flowers she had planted with her children. Birthdays had always been emotional for her, not because of age, but because they reminded her of the people she had lost and the ones who stayed. She missed her mother, she missed old friends, and somewhere in that quiet ache she realized she missed Keanu too. She whispered to herself, "He always brings calm wherever he goes." Just then her phone rang. It was an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment, then answered softly, "Hello?" A familiar voice came through, deep, calm, and gentle. "Hey, Sandra." "It's me." For a moment she couldn't speak. Her heart skipped a beat. "Keanu?" she asked, almost in disbelief. He chuckled softly. That same modest, quiet laugh she remembered. "Happy birthday." Sandra smiled, her eyes filling with warmth. "You remembered?" "How could I forget?" He replied, "You've always been one of the good ones." There was silence between them for a moment, not awkward, but peaceful, like the space between two waves before they touched the shore. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means a lot." Keanu hesitated, then said, "Listen, I know you don't like surprises, but I was wondering if I could stop by later. I have something I want to give you." She laughed softly. "Keanu Reeves planning a surprise?" "That's new," he smiled on the other end. "Maybe I'm changing." "All right," she said gently. "Come by in the evening. The kids will love to see you." When the call ended, Sandra stood still for a moment, her heart beating faster than she expected. She didn't know what he was planning, but somehow she felt a quiet excitement rise inside her. As the day went on, she prepared a simple dinner, not fancy, just warm and homely. She lit candles, arranged flowers, and tried to calm the strange mix of joy and nervousness inside her. She wasn't expecting anything grand. Knowing Keanu, it would be something simple, maybe a book, maybe a handwritten note. But she didn't care about the gift. It was the thought that mattered. As the sky turned orange and gold, a knock came at the door. She walked slowly to answer it, her hands slightly trembling. When she opened the door, Keanu stood there, holding a small box wrapped in plain brown paper. He looked the same, yet different, calmer, wiser, softer around the edges. "Happy birthday, Sandra," he said, his voice low and sincere. She smiled, her eyes shimmering under the warm light. "Come in, Keanu." He stepped inside, and for a moment, everything felt like it had frozen in time. Two old souls who had shared laughter, silence, and unspoken understanding for years. They sat down together, and she opened the box slowly. Inside was a simple silver locket with a small engraving that read, "For all the quiet moments that changed everything." She looked at him, speechless. "Keanu, this is beautiful," he smiled softly. "You once told me that life isn't about grand moments, it's about quiet ones. I never forgot that." Her eyes filled with tears. "You actually remembered that conversation?" "Every word," he said. She took a deep breath, trying to hold back her emotions, but the sincerity in his eyes made it impossible. "Thank you, Keanu. This means more than you know." He looked around the room at the photographs of her children, at the candles, at the peace that surrounded her. "You've built something beautiful here," he said gently. She nodded. "It's taken time, but I think I'm finally learning what peace feels like." Keanu smiled, then grew quiet. His gaze softened, and he said almost as a whisper, "You know, sometimes peace is just a person who reminds you that the world still has light." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and beautiful. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The candles flickered, and outside, the wind carried a soft melody through the trees. Sandra felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. Not romance exactly, but connection, deep and real. She realized that no matter how far they drifted, Keanu always found his way back, not through grand gestures, but through honesty and kindness. But as the evening went on, she noticed something unusual in his eyes, a quiet sadness he tried to hide behind his calm smile. She wanted to ask about it, but before she could, he stood up and said, "I'll tell you everything soon, just not tonight." She looked at him confused. "Keanu, what's wrong?" He shook his head lightly. "Nothing you need to worry about tonight. Tonight's about you." And before she could say anything else, he hugged her softly, whispering, "Thank you for being who you are." When he left, the night felt heavier than before. She stood by the door, the locket in her hand, her heart full of warmth but also worry. She knew something was hidden behind his words, something he wasn't ready to share. As she closed the door, she whispered, "Whatever it is, I'll be here, outside." Keanu walked into the quiet night, the sound of his footsteps echoing against the empty street. He looked up at the stars and sighed deeply. The truth he hadn't told her yet pressed hard against his chest, something that could change everything. And as the screen would fade to black for this part, the final line would echo softly in the narration. He gave her a gift that night, but what he carried in his heart was a secret that would soon break hers. The unspoken truth, the next morning, Sandra woke up earlier than usual. The first light of dawn brushed across her room, and for a moment, she just lay there, listening to the quiet hum of her home. The silver locket rested on her nightstand, its small engraving glinting softly in the pale light. She touched it gently, remembering Keanu's words from the night before. Something about the way he looked at her kept replaying in her mind, that faint smile hiding something deeper, something heavy. After making breakfast for her children, she sat outside with a cup of tea, letting the cool breeze brush against her face. She tried to shake off the unease she felt, but it lingered. She knew Keanu well enough to recognize when he was carrying pain. He had always been the quiet one, the man who absorbed his own suffering rather than share it. She respected that, but now it worried her. She picked up her phone and typed a message. "Thank you again for yesterday." It meant a lot. She hesitated before adding another line. "Are you okay?" She read it twice, then deleted the last question. She didn't want to push. She sent only the first sentence and put the phone down. Across the city, Keanu sat in a small cafe looking out the window. He had barely slept. The sound of cars outside mixed with the faint buzz of the espresso machine. He stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, his mind drifting back to last night. The candles, her laughter, the warmth in her home. It had felt like peace, something he hadn't felt in years. But beneath that peace, guilt still moved like a shadow he couldn't escape. His phone buzzed, and when he saw Sandra's message, he smiled faintly. He started typing a reply, then stopped halfway. What could he say? "Thank you again" sounded so small compared to what he really felt. She had no idea what was going on behind the surface, and part of him wanted to keep it that way, at least for now. He deleted the words and instead wrote, "Seeing you was the best part of my week." He hit send, then leaned back in his chair, watching the message go through. Meanwhile, Sandra read his reply and smiled softly. There was warmth in it, but also a distance. She could feel it in the space between his words. Later that afternoon, as she sat in her living room flipping through an old photo album, her daughter walked in holding a small envelope that had just arrived. "Mom, this came for you," she said, placing it on the table. Sandra frowned slightly. There was no sender name on it, just her address written neatly in blue ink. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single photo, an old candid shot of her and Keanu during the filming of Speed. They were sitting side by side on a bench, both laughing at something out of frame. Behind the photo was a folded note. She opened it slowly and read the words. "Some moments never fade. Happy birthday again. I thought you'd like this memory back." It was unsigned, but she knew the handwriting instantly. "Keanu's." She smiled, holding the photo close. But the moment of joy didn't last long, because she noticed something else. Faintly visible on the bottom of the paper was another line. Written so lightly it almost seemed accidental. "Some things are harder to return." Her smile faded. She read the line again, her chest tightening slightly. What did he mean by that? Was it something personal? Something from their past? Or was it something more serious, something he didn't want to say out loud? That night, she tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. Instead, she sat quietly by the window, watching the rain begin to fall outside. The city lights blurred through the glass, and somewhere deep inside, she felt the same mix of warmth and worry that had followed her since he left her house. Keanu, meanwhile, sat in his apartment, the dim light from a single lamp spilling across his desk. Beside him were piles of old letters, scripts, and photographs, pieces of a life he had built and rebuilt many times. On the table was a medical report, folded neatly but heavy with truth. His doctor's words from the week before echoed in his mind. "You've been pushing yourself too hard. It's not life-threatening yet, but you need to slow down. If you don't, it could become serious." He had nodded quietly when he heard it, but deep down he knew he wouldn't slow down. He didn't know how. His life had always been about moving forward, about finding meaning through pain. But now, for the first time in a long while, he wondered if maybe slowing down wasn't about giving up. Maybe it was about choosing peace. He looked at the photo he had sent Sandra earlier that day. Their laughter, so pure, so unburdened, felt like a reminder of everything he had lost and everything he had tried to protect. The next morning, Sandra received a message from Keanu. "Are you free this weekend?" "There's something I'd like you to see," she replied. "Yes." "What is it?" he responded. "You'll see. It's something I've been working on quietly." That small hint stirred her curiosity. She smiled and typed back, "All right, I'm in." "Just promise you're not planning another surprise with motorcycles and danger," he replied with a laughing emoji. Something simple, human, lighthearted, by Saturday afternoon. She drove to the location he had sent her. It was outside the city, near a quiet stretch of forest and hills. When she arrived, she saw Keanu standing near a small wooden cabin, surrounded by tall trees and silence. He was dressed simply in a black jacket and jeans, his hair slightly messy from the wind. "What is this place?" she asked as she got out of the car. He smiled. "It's a small retreat I built during the pandemic. Somewhere to disconnect, breathe, and remember who I am." She looked around, her eyes softening. The cabin was simple but beautiful. Natural wood, open windows, a stone path leading to a lake not far away. "It's peaceful," she said quietly. "That's the idea," he replied. "Sometimes peace doesn't come from what we have, but from what we let go of." They sat on the porch for hours, talking about everything and nothing, old memories, silly stories, the strange loneliness that fame never fixed. Sandra found herself laughing again, really laughing, in a way she hadn't in months. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Keanu grew quiet. He looked at her for a long moment and said, "You know, sometimes I think we meet people not by chance, but because the universe knows we need them." She smiled faintly. "And what do you think the universe wanted when it brought us together?" He looked at the horizon, his eyes reflecting the fading light. "Maybe it wanted me to remember kindness? And maybe it wanted you to remember you're never alone." Her heart tightened. She wanted to ask what he meant, but before she could, he stood up and walked toward the edge of the porch, looking at the lake. The silence around them was gentle, yet filled with something unspoken. "Keanu," she said softly, standing beside him, "if something's wrong, you can tell me." He took a deep breath, then turned to her with a quiet smile. "I will, soon. I just need to find the right words." "You're scaring me," she whispered. He shook his head gently. "Don't be scared, just promise me one thing." "What?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "No matter what happens, remember yesterday. Remember peace." His words sent a chill through her. She didn't know why, but they sounded like a goodbye wrapped in kindness. They stood there for a long time as the sun disappeared behind the trees. The wind moved through the branches, carrying the faint sound of water against the rocks. When Sandra finally turned to look at him, she saw that he was staring at the horizon, his eyes distant, as if lost in a memory he wasn't ready to share. And then, as the night began to fall, he said quietly, almost to himself, "There's something I haven't told you yet. And when you know, everything will change." She froze, her heartbeat quickening. "What do you mean?" He looked at her with eyes full of both tenderness and sorrow. "Not tonight," he whispered, "but soon." The screen would fade there, the sound of the wind lingering, her face turning toward him in silence. Before the narration ends with a soft voice, he brought her to a place of peace, but the truth he carried would soon shatter it. The letter he never meant to send, the following week, passed slowly, each day carrying the same quiet question in Sandra's heart. What was Keanu hiding? She tried to push it away, convincing herself it was probably something small, maybe about a project, maybe about an old memory. But every time she replayed his words, "Remember yesterday, remember peace," they sounded heavier, as if there was something final in them. She hadn't heard from him since their afternoon at the cabin. No messages, no calls, nothing. She tried not to worry, but by the 5th day, she gave in and dialed his number. It rang a few times before going to voicemail again. She thought about leaving a message, but her voice felt tight. Instead, she just whispered, "Please call me back." Keanu, at that same moment, sat alone in his apartment, the same medical report lying open on the table. He stared at the paper, though he had memorized every word by now. His condition wasn't critical yet, but it was worsening faster than expected. His doctor had urged him to begin treatment immediately, but the thought of being in a hospital again brought back memories he wasn't ready to face. The sterile lights, the quiet machines, the endless questions about his pain, both physical and emotional. He had lived through so much loss that part of him had learned to live with pain instead of fighting it. But now, seeing Sandra again had changed something inside him. She reminded him that life wasn't just about enduring, it was about feeling, even when it hurt. He picked up his phone, started typing a message to her, and then stopped. Instead, he opened his old notebook, the one he had used to write thoughts, letters, and reflections over the years. On a clean page, he began to write. Dear Sandra, I know you'll be angry if you find out like this, but there are things I need to say before I lose the courage to speak them. You've always been light in a world that keeps dimming for people like me. I've spent years trying to make peace with everything, with the past, with loss, with the silence that follows every goodbye. But the truth is, peace isn't something I found. It's something you reminded me to feel again. He paused, staring at the words, then continued. I didn't come to your birthday just to give you a gift. I came because I needed to see someone who still believes in kindness, who still believes that quiet people like us can find meaning in a noisy world. The doctors say I need treatment soon, and I will. But there's a part of me that needed to face something before that. The fear of saying goodbye before I'm ready. When he finished writing, he folded the paper neatly and placed it inside an envelope. He didn't sign it. He wasn't sure if he'd ever send it. The next day, Sandra was at home editing a few notes for a small charity project when the doorbell rang. She opened it to find a courier holding a small brown envelope. It didn't say who it was from, but the handwriting on the label looked familiar. She felt a flutter in her chest as she took it and thanked the courier. Inside was another photograph. This one of her and Keanu sitting side by side on the film set of the lake house. She was holding a cup of tea, smiling softly at him, while he looked at her like he was seeing peace itself. On the back of the photo were just 5 words, written in blue ink. Do you still believe in peace? Her breath caught. That was what he had said to her at the cabin. She sat down slowly, her hands trembling. Something wasn't right. She knew it now. She tried calling him again, but the call went straight to voicemail. 3 days later, she decided to go to his place. She didn't tell anyone where she was going, not her assistant, not her friends. She just got in her car and drove through the soft rain toward his apartment. When she arrived, the city was quiet. She climbed the stairs, her heart pounding harder with every step. When she knocked on his door, there was no answer. She tried again. Nothing. Just as she was about to turn away, the door opened slightly and his neighbor, an older woman, peeked out from the next apartment. Are you looking for Keanu? The woman asked gently. Yes, Sandra said quickly. Have you seen him? He's not answering his phone. The woman hesitated, her expression softening. He left 2 days ago. Said he was going somewhere peaceful for a while. Did he say where? The woman shook her head. Just that he needed some quiet. He looked tired, dear. Really tired. Sandra thanked her and walked back to her car, the weight in her chest growing heavier. She sat there for a long time, staring at the raindrops sliding down her windshield. She didn't know what hurt more, that he hadn't told her where he was going, or that he had felt he couldn't. That night, she sat on her couch holding the photo and the locket. Her mind went back to his voice, his words, his eyes. Everything about that last day at the cabin now felt like a farewell in disguise. Meanwhile, miles away in a small mountain retreat not far from the cabin they had visited, Keanu sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, watching the sunset fade behind the trees. The air was cold, the kind that bit gently at the skin, but he didn't mind. He liked the silence. It felt like an old friend. He held his notebook on his lap and flipped to the letter he had written. He hadn't mailed it, but somehow he wanted her to find it if he couldn't tell her in person. His phone buzzed on the table beside him. A message from Sandra appeared. I went to your place. Your neighbor said you left. Are you okay? Please tell me you're okay. He stared at the message for a long time, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He wanted to tell her everything. About the diagnosis, about the exhaustion, about the fear of becoming another sad story in her memory. But he couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he wrote, I'm somewhere peaceful. I just need a little time to think. I promise I'll tell you everything soon. She read the message, tears filling her eyes. Please don't shut me out again, she replied. Whatever it is, we can face it together. He smiled faintly at her words, his heart both aching and healing at the same time. You always say the right thing, he wrote back. Maybe that's your magic, she replied. No. Maybe that's what happens when someone truly matters. Her message stayed on his screen for a long while. He read it again and again before closing his eyes. The next morning, he wrote another entry in his notebook. It's strange how peace and pain can sit together so quietly. She doesn't know it yet, but seeing her reminded me of everything I still want to fight for. Maybe that's what hope is, not the absence of fear, but the decision to face it for someone who believes in you. Back in Los Angeles, Sandra sat by the fireplace that night, scrolling through old interviews and videos of the two of them together. She remembered his laughter, his gentle pauses, the way he always looked down when people tried to praise him. She had always admired his humility, but now she realized it sometimes came with a hidden weight, a refusal to let others carry his pain. She whispered to herself, "You don't have to be strong all the time. Keanu." She picked up the locket and opened it. Inside, she noticed something she hadn't before. A tiny folded paper hidden under the metal clasp. She carefully pulled it out and unfolded it. Written in the same calm handwriting were the words, "When the time comes, look for me where the mountains meet the water. That's where I'll find peace." Her heart dropped. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew she couldn't wait for him to call. As the scene fades, the narrator's voice lowers to a soft, emotional tone. She thought it was just another note, another quiet message. But those words would soon lead her to the truth, a truth she wasn't ready to face. Where the mountains meet the water, the morning air in Los Angeles carried the faint chill of winter's approach. But Sandra barely noticed it. Her mind was fixed on one thing, the note inside the locket. Where the mountains meet the water. The words circled in her mind like a quiet storm that refused to fade. She had no idea what they meant, but her heart told her it wasn't just poetry. It was a clue, a place, maybe even a goodbye. She spent the next few hours searching through old messages, interviews, and photos, trying to remember if Keanu had ever mentioned a spot like that. Then suddenly she remembered, years ago, during a magazine interview, he had spoken briefly about a lake he loved visiting when he needed silence. "It's up north," he had said, "a place where the mountains meet the water. It feels like the world stops there." The memory hit her like lightning. She stood up quickly, her heart racing. That was it. That was where he had gone. By evening, she packed a small bag, left a message for her assistant saying she needed a few days away, and quietly drove out of the city. As she drove, the noise of Los Angeles faded behind her. The lights, the traffic, the endless motion of fame and attention, replaced by long stretches of empty road and soft blue skies. The deeper she drove into the mountains, the quieter it became, as if the world itself was holding its breath. By the second day, the roads narrowed into winding paths surrounded by pine trees and silver mist. She stopped at a small diner for coffee, and while paying the bill, she asked the waitress, "Excuse me, is there a lake nearby?" "Somewhere peaceful, where the mountains meet the water." The waitress smiled softly. "You mean Serenity Lake? That's about 12 miles from here. Not many people go there anymore. It's beautiful, but lonely." "Lonely is okay," Sandra said quietly. She followed the directions, and as the car climbed higher, the air turned colder. When she finally reached the top of the hill and saw the view, her breath caught in her chest. Below her stretched a wide, still lake surrounded by tall mountains. The water shimmered like glass under the pale sunlight. It was so quiet that even her heartbeat felt too loud. She parked by a small wooden pier and stepped out, pulling her coat tighter. The wind carried the scent of pine and rain. As she walked closer to the edge of the lake, she saw something that made her stop. A small cabin not far away, the same one she had seen with Keanu weeks before. Her chest tightened. She walked slowly toward it, every step feeling heavier than the last. When she reached the porch, she noticed a motorcycle parked to the side, covered in dust and leaves. It was his. She felt her throat close. She knocked gently on the cabin door.
"Keanu?"
Her voice trembled. "It's me." No answer. She tried again. "Please, if you're here, open the door." The silence stretched until she thought her heart might break. Then, slowly, the door opened. Keanu stood there, wrapped in a dark sweater, his hair slightly longer, his eyes tired but calm. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just looked at each other. Two people who had shared so many moments in silence that words felt almost unnecessary. Finally, she whispered, "Why didn't you tell me where you were?" He smiled faintly. "I needed time. I didn't want you to worry. You disappeared," she said softly. "Of course I worried." He looked down, guilt flickering in his expression. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make it harder." "Then tell me what's going on," she said, stepping closer. "Please, no more hiding." He sighed and motioned for her to come inside. The cabin was quiet, warm from the fireplace. There were books stacked in small piles, a guitar leaning against the wall, and a few handwritten notes scattered across the table. It looked like a place someone had built not to escape life, but to face it quietly. He poured her a cup of tea and sat across from her. For a long moment, he didn't speak. His eyes were fixed on the flames, his hands clasped tightly around the cup. "I got some news a few weeks ago," he said finally. "About my health." Her stomach dropped. "Your health?" He nodded. "I've been feeling off for a while. The doctors said it's something I've had for years, but it's gotten worse. It's not fatal yet, but if I don't start treatment soon, it could become serious." She stared at him, her heart aching. "Why didn't you tell me before?" He smiled weakly. "Because I didn't want to be another sad story in your life." "You've carried enough already?" "That's not fair," she whispered. "You don't get to decide what I can carry." His eyes softened. "I know, I wanted to give you something better to remember than hospital walls and worry. I wanted you to remember peace." Tears filled her eyes. "You think I care about perfect memories?" "I care about you, Keanu. That's all." He reached across the table and took her hand. His touch was gentle, warm. "You always see the best in people, even when they're running from the truth." She shook her head. "You're not running. You're scared, and that's okay. We face it together." For a long time, he didn't answer. His eyes glistened under the soft firelight. "I don't know how to explain it," he said finally. "Sometimes I feel like I've been living on borrowed time. I've lost so much, Sandra. People, moments, pieces of myself. And then there you were, reminding me that kindness still matters, that love doesn't have to be loud to be real." Her tears spilled silently down her cheeks. "And you think disappearing makes that easier?" He smiled sadly. "No, it makes it harder. But it also makes it honest. I'm not ready to let you see me at my weakest." She stood up and walked toward the window, staring out at the lake. "Do you think strength is pretending you don't need anyone?" "Because it's not. Strength is allowing people to stay even when things fall apart." He didn't reply. The only sound was the wind brushing softly against the cabin walls. After a long silence, she turned to him again. "Let me stay here with you for a few days, just to be sure you're okay." He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "All right. But only if you promise not to cry when I start acting like a grumpy old man." She laughed softly through her tears. "No promises." The next few days were quiet but beautiful. They cooked together, talked for hours, and walked by the lake each morning. She watched him find small moments of peace, the way he stopped to feed the birds, the way he smiled at the sound of rain on the roof. It was as if being there had brought him back to himself, even if just for a little while. One evening, as they sat by the fire, he picked up his guitar and began to play softly. The tune was slow, tender, almost like a memory turned into sound. She closed her eyes and listened, feeling each note settle deep in her chest. When the song ended, he said quietly, "You know, I wrote this years ago, but I never finished it. Maybe it was waiting for this moment." She smiled gently. "Then finish it now." He looked at her, his eyes filled with warmth and sorrow. "Maybe some songs aren't meant to end." She didn't know why, but those words made her heart tighten. She reached for his hand, and he held it without speaking. The night stretched on quietly, filled with unspoken thoughts. As the fire burned lower, she whispered, "You'll get through this, Keanu. I know you will." He smiled faintly, almost as if trying to believe her. "And if I don't?" She looked at him, tears glimmering. "Then I'll carry your peace for you." He looked at her for a long time, the firelight flickering in his eyes, and then nodded slowly. That's the kindest thing anyone's ever said to me. They sat together until the flames dimmed, and for a while it felt like the world had stopped turning. But outside, the wind began to rise, and dark clouds gathered over the mountains. As she fell asleep on the couch, Keanu quietly covered her with a blanket and looked at her one last time before stepping outside. The cold air brushed against his face, and he took a deep breath. Staring at the dark water reflecting the storm above, he whispered to the night, "Thank you for finding me again." The screen fades slowly as the narrator's voice returns in a low, emotional tone. She thought the worst was behind them. But that night, something would happen by the water that would change everything. The night the silence broke. The wind howled softly through the trees that night, carrying with it a strange heaviness, a kind of stillness that felt too quiet to be safe. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low, casting a warm golden glow that danced faintly across the walls. Sandra slept soundly on the couch, her hand resting near the edge of the blanket Keanu had laid over her. For the first time in years, she looked peaceful, unguarded, like someone who had finally stopped running. Keanu sat by the window, unable to sleep. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, its surface rippling gently. He had always found comfort in that view, the endless stretch of calm water framed by tall, dark mountains. It reminded him that everything in life was temporary, even pain. He took a slow sip of tea and opened his notebook again. He began to write quietly, his handwriting soft and careful, as if he didn't want to wake the night itself. There's something beautiful about silence, but sometimes it becomes too loud. I've learned that peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the acceptance of what you can't control. She came all this way just to make sure I wasn't alone. I don't deserve that kind of kindness, but maybe that's what makes it real. He stopped writing when a wave of dizziness hit him. His hand trembled slightly. The room blurred for a moment, and he had to steady himself against the table. It passed quickly, but the warning was clear. His body was weaker than he wanted to admit. He looked back at Sandra, sleeping peacefully, and whispered softly, "Don't worry about me, Sandy. Just remember this piece." He stood, walked to the door, and stepped outside. The night air was cold, sharp against his skin. The sound of water gently lapping against the rocks filled the quiet. Above, the stars stretched endlessly, clear and bright, as if the universe itself was listening. He walked down to the lake's edge, his steps slow but steady. Each step echoed softly in the night. He stopped at the old wooden pier and stared at the water. Still, dark, infinite. For a moment, he felt the same sense of peace that had drawn him here weeks ago. Then he closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Inside the cabin, Sandra stirred suddenly. She didn't know why, but her heart began to race. Something in her instincts told her the silence wasn't right anymore. She sat up quickly, looking around the room. The fire was almost out. The blanket had slipped from her shoulders. "Keanu," she called softly. No answer. She stood and checked the bedroom. Empty. She turned toward the window and froze. The pier. There was someone standing at the edge, barely visible in the dim light. Her heart dropped. She grabbed her coat and ran outside, the cold biting through her clothes. "Keanu!" she shouted, her voice echoing against the lake. He turned slowly, smiling faintly when he saw her. "You should be inside," he said quietly. She stopped a few feet away, her breath clouding in the air. "What are you doing out here?" "It's freezing." He looked back at the water. "I couldn't sleep. It's strange. The world feels so quiet here, like it's finally stopped asking for something." She stepped closer, her voice soft but urgent. "Please come back inside." "You're not well." He smiled again, that same gentle smile that always carried both warmth and sadness. "You remember what I said? About some songs not being meant to end?" She nodded, tears already filling her eyes. "Yes." "Maybe life's like that too," he whispered. Her voice broke. "Don't say that. You're going to be fine. We'll get you treatment, Keanu. You'll get better." He shook his head slightly. "You always believe in hope. That's what makes you who you are. But sometimes, hope is learning to let the world be what it is." The wind picked up, rustling the trees. The clouds moved across the moon, casting fleeting shadows across the lake. Sandra stepped closer and grabbed his arm gently. "Don't talk like this, please. I came here because I need you to fight." He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, his eyes glistening. "You already gave me something worth fighting for." A tear slid down her cheek. "Then fight for it." For a moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he nodded. "All right. I promise." They stood together in silence, the sound of the water between them. The promise hung in the air like something fragile and sacred. But as they turned to walk back toward the cabin, Keanu suddenly stumbled. Sandra caught him just in time before he collapsed completely. "Keanu!" she cried, panic surging through her. He tried to speak but couldn't. His face had gone pale and his breathing came in shallow bursts. She lowered him gently onto the ground, tears streaming down her face. "Stay with me. Please, stay with me." He looked up at her, trying to focus. "It's all right," he whispered weakly. "Just remember peace." "No," she said, her voice breaking. "Don't do this." "You promised," he smiled faintly. "I'm still keeping it." His eyes began to close. She held his hand tightly, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. "Keanu, look at me." "Stay with me." His voice was barely audible now. "You know something, Sandy? You were always the light." Her tears fell onto his hand. "Please, please don't leave me." His breathing grew slower, his grip weaker. She pressed her forehead against his and whispered, "You're not alone. You'll never be alone." The world went quiet again, painfully quiet. The wind softened, the waves calmed, and the stars above seemed to fade into stillness. For a moment, she thought time had stopped, and then, as the moonlight reflected across the water, she realized the silence she was hearing was not peace. It was loss. She held him close, sobbing quietly, her body trembling against his stillness. The locket around her neck brushed against his hand, the same one he had given her days ago. The engraving caught the moonlight. For all the quiet moments that changed everything. She whispered through her tears. "You changed everything." The camera would fade out slowly there. The sound of the lake, the wind, and her voice echoing softly as the narrator speaks. He promised her peace, but in giving it, he took a piece of her heart with him. As dawn began to rise, she sat by the lake still holding his hand, the world around her wrapped in pale gold light. And though grief filled her chest like an ocean, a strange calm began to spread through her. She looked at the horizon and whispered, "I'll carry your peace, just like I said." The water shimmered in response, as if listening, and far across the lake, where the mountains met the light, the world felt both heartbreakingly quiet and beautifully eternal. The screen would fade gently to black as the narrator's final words of this part echo softly. She had found the place where the mountains met the water, but she hadn't yet realized that this was only the beginning of what he left behind. The gift he left behind, the morning after the storm, was painfully quiet. Mist rose slowly from the lake, wrapping the world in soft silver light. Sandra sat on the old wooden pier, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the still water. Her eyes were red, but her face was calm. Not because the pain was gone, but because she had accepted it was real. The rescue team had already come and gone. The world outside would soon know what had happened. Cameras would swarm, headlines would appear, and people would talk about tragedy. But she didn't want that. She didn't want his story to become another headline filled with noise. She wanted people to remember him the way he truly was, quiet, kind, and full of grace. She stayed at the cabin for 2 more days. She couldn't leave yet. The walls, the books, the soft hum of the wind, everything still carried his presence. Every small thing felt sacred now. On the second evening, while sorting through his things, she found the notebook he had written in, the same one he had been carrying everywhere. Its pages were filled with thoughts, letters, and sketches, fragments of his heart. She opened it slowly, afraid to breathe too loudly, as if the air itself could disturb his words. On the first page he had written, "If you are reading this, then maybe I finally found peace. Don't be sad for me, Sandy. Sadness has no home where love once lived. I never told you everything because I didn't want fear to be the last thing you remembered about me. I wanted you to remember light." Her tears began to fall again, silent and steady. She turned the page. There's a key hidden in the back of the book. Follow it to the small wooden box in the drawer by the window. You'll understand what it means when you see it. Her hands trembled as she reached the last few pages. At the very end of the notebook, tucked between two sheets, she found a small silver key. She stood up slowly, walked to the drawer he mentioned, and opened it. Inside was a wooden box, plain and simple, tied with a ribbon. She sat down and opened it carefully. Inside were photographs, some from their films, others from quiet moments she never knew he had kept. There was also a folded letter addressed to her, and beneath it a small USB drive. She opened the letter first. Dear Sandy, if you're reading this, I guess I couldn't say goodbye the way you deserved. But please know this. Meeting you changed me more than anything else in this world. You taught me that kindness doesn't need applause, that strength isn't loud, and that silence can hold love too. There's a video on this drive. It's something I've been working on in secret. Not a movie, not a documentary, just a message for you and for anyone who believes that stillness can heal. If you choose to share it, let it remind people that peace is not something you find. It's something you build, moment by moment, through love. Her hands shook as she finished reading. She plugged the USB into her laptop, and the screen flickered to life. The video opened with the sound of wind and the view of the lake at sunrise. Keanu's voice spoke softly, calm and grounded. I've always believed that every person carries light, he said. Some people hide it, some lose it, and some spend their whole lives trying to find it again. But sometimes, if you're lucky, you meet someone who reminds you that your light never left. It was just waiting to be seen. The camera turned slowly, showing him sitting by the water, the mountains behind him. His expression was peaceful, almost weightless. This message is not about me, he continued. It's about kindness. It's about forgiveness. It's about how even after loss, love can still live quietly inside us, changing the way we see the world. He smiled faintly. If you're watching this, Sandy, thank you for being light when the world went dark, for believing that peace is possible. And if you ever miss me, don't look for me in the past. Look for me in every quiet moment you choose to be kind. The video faded to black, and the final words appeared on the screen in his handwriting. Peace is not the end. It's the beginning of everything that matters. Sandra closed the laptop, tears streaming down her face. But this time, they weren't only from pain, they were from gratitude, from love, from the quiet realization that he had left her something far greater than sorrow. He had left her purpose. Weeks later, she returned to Los Angeles. She avoided interviews, ignored reporters, and stayed out of the spotlight. But one evening, she called her assistant and said softly, I want to share something, not about his death, but about his peace. A month later, a short video appeared online titled The Quiet Light. It wasn't framed as a tribute. It wasn't dramatic or sad. It was simply Keanu's message, his voice, his lake, his truth. Within days, millions of people watched it. Comments flooded in from around the world. People spoke about kindness, forgiveness, second chances, and the beauty of quiet strength. For the first time, Sandra realized that grief could transform into something living, something that continued his message far beyond the boundaries of a single life. Months later, she returned to the same cabin by the lake. The air was warm this time, filled with birdsong and sunlight. She walked to the pier, holding the locket in her hand. She knelt by the water and whispered, I kept my promise. I carried your peace. She opened the locket, removed the small engraving, and gently let it fall into the water. The silver shimmered once before sinking slowly into the depths. As she watched it disappear, a sense of calm spread through her. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The wind brushed her hair softly, almost like a touch, gentle, familiar. Kind, she smiled faintly and whispered, You're still here. The camera would linger there. The light on the water, the still mountains, her reflection. As the narrator's voice fades in, low and soft, love doesn't end when someone leaves. It becomes part of the silence they leave behind. And sometimes, in that silence, we find our truest peace. The final shot would fade to black. leaving only the sound of gentle water and a few lines of text appearing slowly, in memory of quiet hearts, kind souls and the peace they leave behind.